Kia ora koutou everyone, and welcome to Where Sea Meets Sky. This is your pre-show Q&A. My name is Michael Norris. I'm obviously the Artistic Director of Stroma, and it's a great pleasure to welcome John RIMMER to our concert on this, his 80th year. And we're celebrating particularly with a performance of his wonderful work for Ensemble, Where Sea Meets Sky 2. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here.
So I wanted to take you back to actually the first Where Sea Meets Sky. Now, I met this work at quite a young age because, of course, it used to be part of the music curriculum at high school. It was a set work. And I remember on first listening, I'd never heard a synthesizer piece before quite like it. And on first listening, I didn't know what to make of it. But it really grew on me that year that I had to listen to it. And particularly your incredibly evocative imagery of flying across the Tasman, and that really stuck in my mind very strongly. Can you maybe just tell us a little bit more about this flight and the kind of sounds it started to suggest to you?
It was a flight from Sydney to Auckland on a very beautiful day, and when the plane reached maximum altitude, you couldn't see the difference between the sky and the sea. So looking out of the plane window, it was as if you were floating in a blue void. And it was only when clouds appeared could you find yourself in a proper position relating to the Earth's surface below. The clouds themselves were tiny dots of clouds, spaced quite a way apart. And then gradually they became lines. Dots and lines together, and then they gradually started to become puffy clouds, more cumulus kind of clouds. And as we approached Auckland Airport, the clouds became denser and blacker. So I'd sketched these clouds during the journey, and I looked at my piece of paper at the end of the journey, and I said to myself, there's a piece here. So I was working at the electronic music studio at Victoria University. I used to go there regularly during the vacations over a period of about 10 years. And Douglas Lilburn had just bought one of the early electronic music synthesizers, and I'd bought one myself, and it was called a Synthi AKS. So I started assembling the sounds on that synthesizer, and gradually the piece evolved from my chart, reacting to that with sound, and then recording and editing and mixing various recordings together. Basically, I built up about 4 stereo recordings and then mixed them together. I mentioned the Synthi AKS. Interesting enough, I sold mine when I began teaching at Auckland University to a musician who was in a group called the Headless Chickens. And he used it quite a lot. And then he sold it to someone else, and I had an email from that person just the other day to say that he was the proud owner of my Synthi AKS. And it's still in use, which is terrific, really. None of the components have died.
No, they're amazing little beasts.
Yeah, so that's more or less Where Sea Meets Sky 1. Yeah.
Was there something particularly about analog synthesis that resonated with you in terms of your interest in landscape? I mean, a lot of your works deal with landscape, but was there something about not dealing with the baggage of instruments that helped in evoking a place and a space?
Yes, I think you're dealing with pure sound, and so it's what you react to a particular sound. I was also always interested in bird sounds. I grew up near the sea, so the sound of the sea is a natural acoustic for me. I like the sound of telephone wires going through vast spaces. That was a sound that I heard one time on a summer holiday, and that came out in another piece. The Where Sea Meets Sky is, for me, was interesting because after I'd composed most of the piece, I was reminded of a poem by Ian Weddy, a poem called Those Others, in which one of the verses is, "The sea does not meet the sky, they kiss only in our minds. They are priceless in that space which recedes forever, where we make them lovers forever." So that journey in the plane reminded me of that poem. And I'd known Ian from our days when he was the Burns Fellow at the University of Otago and I was the Mozart Fellow at the same time. Yeah. So that was something about the purity of electronic music and the way that related to natural sounds.
And particularly its ability to really evoke vastness. I think
Yeah.
that was one of the things about your piece that really resonated with me, was I'd never heard anything so kind of immense before, and that has stayed with me. I'm interested, though, how you got from that then to the piece we're going to hear tonight, Where Sea Meets Sky 2. Obviously, you talk about it growing out of the electronic piece, but were there particular processes or strategies you used to get it into a non-electronic domain?
The way I did that, I took each of the main parts of the electronic piece. For instance, the opening of the electronic piece is this kind of big chord, and so I decided to start the second piece with a similar chord. And then having done that, I then went back and tried to find an instrumental equivalent of the electronic music, which had been derived from the cloud formation. And that's the process I used largely in that piece. It's an outgrowth in the sense that the instrumental piece does some things that are not in the electronic music. So it grows out from the electronic music, but it's very much conditioned initially by the electronic music.
One thing that fascinates me, and I'd love to compare them side by side, is obviously when you're dealing with instruments or an instrumental ensemble, you're dealing a lot more with pitch, particularly. Well, that's typically what you're dealing with. Whereas in electronic music, you are more thinking about frequency, or it may just be the particular twiddle of a potentiometer that sets the frequency, and you have no idea what pitch you're dealing with. Did you add any other pitch structuring to the piece, or did you try and transcribe the harmonic content of the electroacoustic piece?
I think I did a little bit of both, transcribing to start with, but then I wanted to exploit the pitch range of the instruments. So the ensemble I chose, violin, cello, flute, clarinet, piano, and percussion, is really based very much on a kind of 20th century standard ensemble that grew from pieces like Pierre et Lunaire of Schoenberg. Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time has similar instruments, but not the percussion or the piano. But it's that kind of two wind instruments, two string instruments, piano and percussion. Once I decided on that ensemble, then I started to move away from the electronic influence towards a more pitched oriented. And I probably had a little series of things. I think I was working with small series in those days.
Having said that, there's clearly, I think, the art of a studio engineer in there, where I hear, for example, high piccolo blurring with violin harmonics, for example, and you do a lot of that kind of...
Yeah. There's a lot of mixing going on.
Yes, I can almost hear you pushing the faders.
That's right, yeah. So it's quite an interesting technique. I mean, you do the mixing in the electronic music studio, but then you say to yourself, I wonder if I could do a similar thing with instruments fading in and out. And that's right. That's what I was trying to do.
Obviously, your you were teaching up in Auckland for a long time, and now you're out in Motueka, living there. Was that something about your love of nature as well, or was that you just wanted to get out of Auckland?
Well, I can say truthfully that when my wife and I left Auckland, we drove away in our car, and as we left the Southern Motorway, we stopped the car, turned around and said, "Goodbye, motorway." We didn't meet another one until we were entering Wellington. But, of course, where we live between Motueka and Kaiteriterre, it's very peaceful. There's not that much going on there, except over the summer months. We have a lot of tourists in that area. But Motueka, we drove in, when we were first there, we drove down the main street, parked the car, went shopping, and said to ourselves, this is just like the North Shore in Auckland 60 years ago. And that was it.
And tell us a little bit about some of the works you've been writing recently. Quite a few sort of for local groups down there, I think, haven't you?
Yes, I've written a few choir pieces in recent years. I wrote a piece for the Nelson Symphony Orchestra called 5 Anniversary Haiku, which was they had a 50th birthday, so that was for that orchestra. I've written some brass band pieces as well, and I just finished my 5th string quartet.
When's that going to be performed?
I have no idea.
I look forward to it one day being performed. Well, we've got about 2 or 3 more minutes. Maybe are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask John?
So, John, you're doing any more electroacoustic? Right?
Yes, I did a piece earlier this year. I've always been dazzled by that wonderful wood print of Hokusai, the Japanese artist. The great wave of Kanagawa. This is the one that influenced Debussy. Debussy's La Mer was influenced by that wood print. So I did a short 6.5-minute piece of my own understanding of that wave and how I reacted to it. I was more interested in all the spray coming off and how the spray turned into birds and things like that. But I have a friend in Motueka who's a sculptor, and she has a commission to do a massive 10 metres long, 4 metres high sculpture in stainless steel with mosaics all over it. It's called Arrivals and Departures, and she wants me to do a sound image to go with the sculpture. So I might disassemble my piece for Hokusai, which I called Hokusai's Reflections, and do something around that.
So where is the sculpture going to go?
It's at the marina at Motueka, Port Motueka. Yeah. It's going up in September.
So what electronic technology are you using now?
For that piece, I used a program called Logic, which is an Apple program, as well as a few sounds that I'd been working on via C-Sound, which is the big computer music program. Yes. Yeah.
I also remember a few of your works using granular synthesis as well and environmental sounds as well. That also stick in my mind. And then this technique, rather than the sort of vast spaces are created from lots and lots of tiny little particles of sound which are sort of overlaid. You still interested in that?
I am.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you create water? Lots of drops of water.
Yes.
Yeah.
And rain. We've had lots of granular synthesis out there at the moment. Well, it's great privilege to have you here today, John, and I hope we do your Where Sea Meets Sky justice. It's a fantastic piece and should be played more. It's really rich and exciting to play, and the players love it. So great you could make it, even if it was via a diversion to Palmerston North this afternoon, sitting on a bus for 2 hours. So please give a big round of applause for John.
I look forward to the performance tonight. Yes.